Mesopotamia? We are going to talk about Mesopotamia. This means, Meso means middle, Potamiae means rivers, so it's in between two rivers. It's in modern day Iraq, Iran, the Middle East, if you've ever heard of that before. So you do want to write down Mesopotamia, because this is everything we're talking about from this point forward, all about Mesopotamia. So a view of Earth, and we're going to zoom in, because all we're really doing is we're moving from Canaan, we're moving to the east, northeast, and into what we know as the Fertile Crescent. And you also want to write that down, that this is located in the Fertile Crescent. Egypt and Mesopotamia are located, and what this means is it's prime for growing crops. It's very bountiful. People are going to migrate to these areas and stay there because it's extremely beneficial for them to do so. And a crescent, if you don't know, is like the crescent moon or a croissant. It's this like C shape, and this is something just historians have coined to just represent that these areas are civilization is occurring here because of the bountiful water supply with in the Egypt, the Nile, and now you also want to put this down as well, the two rivers. The two rivers are the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Now, in these areas, in this area in Mesopotamia, you're going to have what's known as city-states. City-states are these little cities and their surrounding area, which would be their state. Now, they all have similar cultures, believe in the same thing, talk the same language, have a lot of same, dress the same, eat the same foods, and so forth. But they are not very different, but they're politically can be different. You can have a different government if you want. One maybe could have a king, another one could have a democracy. Here we're all going, these early Sumerian civilizations, as I'm going to talk about here, will be kings, monarchies, right? So a way of kind of thinking of it like Pittsburgh and Cleveland. They probably have the same type of background, maybe dress the same, maybe some religious similarities, eat the same type of food. They're not that far away from one another if you imagine them as city-states. But if you talk about the Browns and the Steelers and the rivalry with sports teams and just in general, they are at each other's throats, and that's a good way of representing. Even though they have way more in common than they do different, they're going to be battling against one another in these city-states, right? These Sumerian city-states. So Sumerians were the first civilization. You do want to put that down. That's major. And this is sometime around, they first started kind of popping up and appearing between 5,000 and 3,300 BC. Roughly, they get their start, what we classify as a civilization, around 3,200 BC. Again, before Christ, right? They're not using that time scale. We use it to understand how long ago it was. But the big thing here, this group of people, the Sumerians, are the first civilization. There were people living, sure, around the world, but they didn't have all of those characteristics we covered earlier in the year, right? They had to have a written language and government, and they had to have religion, and they had a social structure and art, architecture, all those things we talked about, right? Sumerians had it, and you'll see here what I'm talking about. And I get right into it, yeah. You have all these different things. This is what classifies an actual civilization. It's not just people living in a certain area. You'll see more than just that, but there are other ones. This is a better representation of what a city-state is, and you should write that down underneath here where it says city-states. A city that, with its surrounding territory, forms an independent state. We tend to think that states, like United States, that's not a country, it's just a state. Everywhere else pretty much in the world, they refer to it as state, as your country. So state equals country. At one point, we were kind of our own individual states, so our own individual countries. But over time, we decided that we're going to unite these states and make one giant country out of them. So a city-state is its own independent. If I make a law, if you see in there on the bottom of your screen, bottom right, Is its own city-state. They don't have to follow any of the rules and regulations across the river in Larsa. They don't, right? So they're independent from one another. They can trade, they can interact, but the laws and things that are put in place don't affect them, right? If there's a new law in California, only California, it doesn't affect Virginia. And that's kind of the same thing here, right? So a city that with its surrounding territory forms an independent city-state. We'll talk about this with Greece. We'll talk about this with the Mayans, the Italian city-states. It is a well-known form of government. So what are the advantages and disadvantages in Mesopotamia? Why live there? Why live there? So think about this before we get into it. Just take a quick guess what you think would be an advantage to living by a river. Well, some disadvantages here. Unpredictable flooding. It wasn't like the Nile. The Nile, they knew, like clockwork, boom, they knew exactly when it was going to flood. Different story with the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which you should have already written down. Those are two very important rivers. Those are the whole civilization is located between them. They're unpredictable here in Mesopotamia. They don't know when exactly they're going to flood. And when they do flood, they believe that the gods are punishing them for maybe bad behavior. So, unpredictable. No natural barriers. And what this means is there's no mountains. There's no giant deserts. There's no big, huge oceans and that protect it really. So their outside invaders can come from any direction. Egypt was a lot better. You have pretty much desert surrounding you or a sea surrounding you, and you're fine. No one's going to cross the Sahara to go into Egypt. So Mesopotamia was different. Anybody from any direction pretty much can come in there. They're in the middle. Remember, Meso means middle. Limited natural resources. Right? They didn't have a lot. They have to kind of trade with other people in order to get the things that they need. Think of all the different natural resources that are out there. They don't have all of them, but they have enough of them. They need more. Advantages. Force the Sumerians to solve these problems. So if you're given a hard life, you need to persevere over that difficult life. And it's going to force you to think. If you don't think, if you don't take advantage of this situation, you're going to suffer and eventually, in this case, die. So they had to solve these problems. They couldn't just sit back and say, well, I don't really want to do it. I'm kind of tired today. Hopefully somebody else will come solve this problem. No. They need to solve these problems quickly that they'll come up with. Like, how do we prevent this flooding? How do we divert the water? How do we deal with lack of resources? All these different issues, it forced them to think. Right? So the easier your life is, the less you have to think, but so the softer you kind of become. But the harder life you have, the more difficult it is, the more strong, resilient person it can build. They built walls out of clay. So they don't have any natural barriers. So what do? You make a human-made barrier. You got to build that wall, right? And that's exactly what they did. They made it out of clay, right? They dug ditches for irrigation. And again, it's coming back to problem solving with the flooding of the river and so forth. And not only using that to their advantage. Well, when it floods, we're going to irrigate the river in such a way that it will water all the crops that we have, and we don't have to worry about it. It's great. They traded extra food for supply. So whatever extra food, they made more food. And to get those natural resources that were not there in the area of Mesopotamia, they just made more food. And they traded it away. So they're interacting with other cultures around the world. So this is what a typical Mesopotamian city would look like, a Sumerian city-state would look like. You have your rivers that are running through it, whether it be the Tigris or Euphrates. You have your ziggurat, that big giant structure there in the top left there. We'll talk about that here soon. Walled cities. You see they have sailboats. We'll talk about that as well. So there's not a lot of trees either, not a lot of natural resources, like I said, but they are making do. So these projects required an amazing amount of manpower, right, to do all these different projects that they're doing. If you're going to do this, you can't just gather a bunch of buddies up together haphazardly and just decide, hey, we're just going to irrigate this river, irrigate these crops or whatever, or build this wall. You need an institution. An institution will need to be in place in order to make these projects possible. You probably have no idea what an institution is, and if you do, you are ahead of the game, and congratulations. An institution that they need a government institution, all right? It consists of a group of people who have come together for a common purpose. That's what any institution is. In this case, it's a government institution to build roads and build canals and irrigation systems and bridges and walls and things like that for the benefit of the city itself. That is what an institution, in this case, government is. Institution isn't just government. It could be hospitals. It could be prison systems. Okay, it could be psychiatric wards. All these institutions that are put in place, whatever you think of, consist of a group of people who have come together for a common purpose. Why are these people coming together for a common purpose? Maybe firefighters. Okay, there's an institution there. School is an institution. Why do you come to school? You all come here for the same reason, to become educated. The common purpose is to better our society one day with your progress as a student that later becomes a productive adult that will do great things. So we'll talk more about institutions as we go, but some of the ones, it goes on: governments and legal institutions, Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, Congress, Marines, Navy, state legislatures, healthcare, doctor's office, hospitals, things like that, justice system, all the courts. I'm not going to go over each one of these. Political institutions, all the different, Democratic, Republican, lobbyist, monarchies, totalitarianism, all those different types. Religious organizations, a church is an institution, right? Why do you all gather to go to a church? For a common purpose, to pray. Why do you go to a hospital? To get better, right? They're all coming for a common purpose. Social welfare institutions, those are all the different institutions that are in place that are there for a reason. They're non-profits, okay, or charities. Now, back to the ziggurat. I briefly mentioned it. The ziggurat is that main structure kind of typically in the center of a city-state in Mesopotamia, and it is a rectangular stepped tower. And you do want to write this down, what a ziggurat is, and you do want to write down the definition. You can summarize: sometimes surmounted by a temple. Ziggurats are first attested in the late 3rd millennium BC and probably inspired biblical story of the Tower of Babel, but really what they are is a rectangular stepped tower where they would hold the grain, have religious purposes and ceremonies and so forth there, right? But it also could serve as, it is a fortified rectangular tower for a variety of reasons. Okay, the higher class, the priests and so forth would be kind of spending a lot of time there, for sure. Sumerian kings. So these Sumerian kings, and this is all taking place around the year 3200 BC. And just to kind of preface with the rest of it, Mesopotamia, this area, is going to be taken over by a variety of different people. The first group of people we're talking about is the Sumerians, and there are other groups of people that are going to be living in conquering the same area. So stay with me here. We're still on Sumerians. So if you became a Sumerian king, you were typically the best warrior of your clan, your tribe, and eventually that would grow into a city-state. The spread of ideas, products, and culture is known as, you do want to write this down as well, the spread of ideas, products, and culture is known as, it's called cultural diffusion. And you are spreading all different amazing things. These Sumerians are all these different achievements and so forth. Again, they're trading. So when you trade, you're not only trading products, you're doing this thing called cultural diffusion. You're trading ideas and culture all together, and it works out extremely well for them, given their circumstances and where they live. And it's not as hospitable as it would be, say, near the Nile. So the Sumerian culture, they believed in many gods, which we know is what? Think in your heads. Polytheism. It's polytheism. Poly means more than one. Okay? Theism, if you see any type of like theism or theo, religion. One major person that you need to know / epic poem, I guess, is the Epic of Gilgamesh. You 100% have to write this down. It's a poem from around the 2100. It is the oldest epic. It is the oldest poem and possibly the oldest story ever found. Right? The first, major story that was written down. As far as we know, this is the oldest text story that we have, and it's the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was 2/3 man, 1/3 God. I'll have some videos for you guys and some readings for you to learn more about it. But he is essentially, this Sumerian powerful king, and a lot of it kind of dealing with your own hubris, kind of thinking like almost too highly of yourself, and kind of a life lesson that no matter what, you're eventually going to die one day. Even if you are 1/3 God and 2/3 human, eventually we will all expire. But there's more to it than just that. It's a whole adventure thing. It's actually a really cool story, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because I'm going to have some of you read it and some of you watch it. Typically in Sumeria, the Sumerians, or any of these Mesopotamian places, any of these Mesopotamian people I'm going to talk about, this is the social order, the social hierarchy. You have slaves are at the bottom. Slaves have been around basically since man has been quote-unquote civilized. And then you have farmers, merchants. Merchants are like people that trade stuff. Landlords, those are people that own the land and they may be rented out. And priests, and at the top you'll have kings. Typically this is how it would go in the area as we know Mesopotamia. But let's talk about some Sumerian achievements. So you do want to write this down because it is very important. Science and technology, arithmetic and geometry, architectural innovations. So if we look, there's some different styles of math that they kind of invented, based out of the number system of 60. Architecture innovations. If you look here, if you think about just architecture, when I think they obviously didn't build this, but what I'm saying here is what they're building for their time frame was like something that you would see like this today, advanced for the time frame. Very well built, very unique, very original. But that's the type of architecture. We keep kind of advancing our architecture throughout time and place, and it gets better and better. To that point, if you don't know, the Burj Khalifa is, as of right now, the tallest building in the world. That it's in Dubai, and that's in one of these. If you don't know, it's one of these United Arab Emirates, and it's the tallest building in the world. I think it's like half a mile up or something like that. I forget exactly the footage on it, but it's insanely high. And we're just, again, as humans, we're doing better. We're going to make bigger and more architectural innovations that go with it. So the Sumerians were this first step. It wasn't like the first humans or the first, advanced civilization decides, okay, let's build the Burj Khalifa. With anything, somebody has to give us the stepping stones. Give us the base, and then from there we can keep working our way up to progress. And if you look back at the first telephones, they didn't invent the cell phone right away. Landlines were extremely popular because that's all they knew how to do. Eventually, one day, we're going to look back on cell phones and think, we use those? That's so primitive. That's so beneath us. It sounds crazy, but you wait. Other things they invented, which you do need to write down, these are the achievements. What are the Sumerians known for? What did they give us? What type of building blocks, cornerstones did they give us? Well, they invented the plow, to push the dirt over so you can plant the seeds and so forth with that. Sailboats, I showed you in that picture that there was boats going down, the sailboat. They weren't just lying around. People had to invent this stuff, and obviously we have way more advanced sailboats than then, but you gotta start somewhere. Circle in 363 degrees, right? Hopefully you know that. The wheel, again, we talk about this in the podcast, not made by the caveman. It's actually the first wheel is the Sumerians, and that's a big game changer, right? That just keeps on going, and you can carry things in carts, and you can carry more stuff. It's not a tire like you would think today, maybe like a wooden one or something to that effect, but it's a circular wheel. They also use levees and canals, so a lot of different ways of diverting waters and channeling water to your advantage. The big one, all right, that they are known for is cuneiform. You 100% have to write this down. 100% have to write this down. Cuneiform is the first written language happening around 3500 BC. Cuneiform. This is what cuneiform writing looks like. You might want to draw in your notes triangles and lines to help you understand it. It looks something like this, right? And you're like, Mr. Shank, I don't see any letters there. I don't understand. Well, this isn't it's not an alphabet. These are like, think of it like pictographs, that each symbol represents a whole idea. It's not a letter. There are no letters yet. They didn't invent that yet. And trust me, English will not even be close to being invented until around like 1200s AD. So we've got a long way till English is even slightly forming. So don't think that the only language ever is English. So this is cuneiform, and you should have already written down it is the first and the oldest form of written language, right? Because before, humans were doing all oral, all verbal, right? And eventually somebody decided that, well, hey, I have ideas, but I want to communicate across time and across space. So I'm going to, use this wedge-shaped tool, and I'm going to poke into this clay tablet, and when it will harden, it will make an impression there, and that triangle and line will represent an idea, whatever idea that may be. And this took off. So cuneiform, as far as we know, maybe tomorrow we find something that's older, but as far as we know, that is the oldest form of written language. When humans decided that I want a brain outside of my body, I want that external hard drive, right? Because you can only store so much here. I know we think we're all the smartest people on the planet. We can store limitless information, but we need help. We need an external hard drive. Even your computers eventually do, right? That you just kind of run out of space up there. Some people can hold lots of memories up here and lots of information. Others need to write it down. Even people that still have it here, in order for it to stick, basically you have to save it. And one way of saving that is to write it down. Then it kind of comes imprinted in there. It's like making a double copy, right? And that helps it maintain. So you should be writing all of this down, right? That I'm telling you. So eventually, the Sumerians are no more. They don't just like disappear. They're just kind of merged eventually with the other groups of people that come in here. But the next group of people we're talking about they're called the Akkadians. So you want to write this down. That the group of people, they're called Akkadians. Just as we are called Americans as a group of people, well, there were groups of people in the land known as Mesopotamia. Sumerians are out of the picture now because we're moving on in time. This is 2350 B.C.E. And there's a guy named Sargon. Sargon of Akkad or Akkad, however you want to say it. And he's going to be famous for something, and you're going to have to know something from him. And the thing that you need to know is that he created the world's first empire. So the big question here is, after you've already written down Sargon created the world's first empire, what is an empire? Why is it considered the first? Well, how do you classify that? What you see is Sargon occupied all of Mesopotamia and up into Asia Minor. And Sargon had different cultures and civilizations and essentially countries under one rule. That would be like if America all of a sudden decides to invade Canada, invade Mexico, invade all of Europe, and let's say they also invade Australia and India, right? And they all say that, okay, we've conquered all of these places, and now they are under the American rule. That's an empire. You have multiple cultures, multiple peoples under one rule. They're not similar cultures. Like people here in America are different than people in India and Australia. We have differences, especially when it comes to like languages. Obviously that's a big barrier there. Like Australia wouldn't be too bad, Canada wouldn't be too bad because at least they're the same language. But when you have the language barrier, that kind of comes in the way. And this is what Sargon did. Sargon just conquers. He's an Akkadian, conquers all of this area here, right? And he becomes known as the world's first emperor. right? Because if you have an empire, you are in control of that, and your title is I am emperor. This is higher up than a king. It's not like kings are here and emperors are here. No, kings are here, emperors are here. You don't want to be king. You want to be king of kings. You want to be an emperor. And Sargon was the first in the world, even before the ones that come into the Egyptian history like we talked about. His empire will last 200 years. It's a pretty long time. To put that in perspective, America has been around for 244 years. So it seems like America's been around forever. We have not. And we'll talk about civilizations that have lasted 10 times as long. Eventually, the Akkadians, they're now out of the picture. Still the same area. Still Mesopotamia. But a new group of people come into play here. This is why it is vital that you pay attention and that you go over this multiple times, because the amount of groups of people that come in here are bountiful. There's a ton of people. They're called the Babylonians, or as the students like to call the Babylonians, right? And write their name down, obviously. Hammurabi. Hammurabi is the most famous Babylonian. Will invent that first law code. And this is very important. And I'll show you here once you have written him down, once you have wrote what he's known for. Don't just write, oh, Hammurabi. Well, what is he known for, right? You've got to be specific with your definitions of people, especially throughout this year. You can't just say, if I was describing you, I wouldn't just say, oh, Derek, boy, Jennifer, girl, the end. Like, that's all you want to be known for? Or, Derek, student. So you couldn't just say Hammurabi, king. King of what? What's this king known for? There are tons of kings out there. What specifically made him worth remembering? And that's what you need to understand for the entire year. Don't just assume, well, there's like people out there and we're just learning a bunch of kings and stuff. There is a reason, right? And here's the first law code. Laws are vital to civilization. Hammurabi put them on these about 7 feet tall. 282 law codes were on these stone pillars all over his empire. We have a couple of these that still survive to this day. But, essentially, that is one of the Babylonian gods giving, in this image here, giving Hammurabi, or the Hammer of Abi, giving him the laws. Because now you have this justification. Hey guys, I didn't make these laws up. They were given to me by the gods. So you can't refute them. And when we talk about these laws too, this is like the eye for an eye, the tooth for a tooth. All of these laws you probably, similar like that, you may have heard of. And there are a lot of other ones that you're going to read and you're going to think, what is happening? These are crazy. How could they ever do this? But this is how perspective comes into play here. Think about this, even just, I think, in the 80s. And this is part of what Mr. Woods and I were talking about this in the podcast. RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the recent death of her kind of shines light on all of her achievements that she had. And one thing she was fighting for is obviously women's rights, but they were mentioning that women couldn't, in the 80s, couldn't get a mortgage without a man's signature. So you'd have a man, you couldn't, if you're a woman, you couldn't just like buy a house on your own. If you were a woman, you couldn't just get a credit card on your own. You had to have a man there. Well, she fought for equal rights here. And we look back on that time period, right? Just in the 80s, in the 1980s, and we're like, those laws are ridiculous. Why were those laws here in the first place? This is what's happening when we're looking at these laws now here. They are absurd to us. Absurd. And you would have hated to live in that time frame. Okay? But they're better than no laws at all. So keep that in perspective. And part of the human evolution of laws and justice and so forth is improving these laws and revisiting some that don't make sense. Go to a website, pull up weird laws in Virginia or weird laws in any state or country you're at. You're going to find some weird laws. And those weird laws means that somebody did that at one point. Like there's a law in Pennsylvania, you're not allowed to sleep on top of your refrigerator outside. You can sleep inside on top of your refrigerator, but you can't sleep outside, right? So that is just shows you that somebody did that at some point. And I guess you can't also sing in the bathtub when you're inside, otherwise in Pennsylvania that is, right? Weird laws out there. We'll go over those some in class. Hammurabi, this kind of all takes place. He kind of codifies and puts all these laws together in 1792 to 1750 BC. Again, he's not going by BC because he doesn't know who Jesus Christ is, right? But we just did this to classify time. That's the main thing from the Babylonians, just Hammurabi, the first law code. The next group of people, they're called the Hittites. The Hittites. And the Hittites, as you see there, they're known for smelting iron. This doesn't mean that they're smelling iron. That's not, they're the first people to smell. No, they're not the first people to smell iron. They're the first people to smelt iron, all right? Think of like shaping the iron when it's hot like that. You have to mix certain materials together in order to get iron. And iron, it's stronger, it holds a sharper edge. It's way better than bronze. And the Hittites are from the area, if you see in the map, in the white there. They're the first people to smelt this iron, and they're a pretty big empire. In Egypt and so forth, had a lot of interactions with the Hittites. Actually had like one of the first peace treaties actually is between these two empires, right? That's what they're known for. And one way of remembering that is you hear Hittites. They're another group of people living in Mesopotamia, but the Hittites means that you're hitting, right? You're hitting. You got to hit that iron while it's hot, and that should help you remember. They didn't name themselves because they thought that one day we'll have 8th graders in King George Middle School, and to help them remember, we're going to name ourselves the Hittites because we're the first people to smelt iron. That's not how that works. It's just a coincidence. It's a way of remembering it. It's a study skill. You can do this in any class. I'll share as much as I possibly can. There's another group of people. They're on Asia Minor. They're still around where the Hittites are. We kind of all include this in Mesopotamia, so they'd still be like northwest of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. But the Lydians are around 600 BC, so we're getting, in this case here, closer and closer to year 0, which is when Jesus Christ will be born. Lydians are not going by BC or BCE, right? They are, you want to write this down as well, just like you wrote down the Hittites, the Lydians were the first people to use coin money. They're the first people to use coin money. And a way of remembering this one is think of a bottle of water, and to open it, you have to twist it, right? And when you twist off the cap, it's also known as a lid, and that lid is about the size of a coin. So think Lydians, lid, coins. Another trick that might help you remember that, okay? They're the first people to use coin money. Before this, they're using a barter system where, hey, I'll give you 5 chickens, you give me 1 cow. That was a fair trade, but there's no equality of measurement here. You might do that same trade 5 days from now, or with another person, and you might only get 4 chickens instead of 5. So they wanted a uniform currency. So Lydians were the first to do this, right? And currency in general is very interesting because it's evolving as we speak. It's just a medium of exchange. Hey, I want that thing that you have. What do I got to do to get it? Well, you got to give me, and the barter system, give me something that you have. And then eventually they're going to do into like weighing gold, or just give me this piece of gold. Now it's a strict unit of measurement. I know, like, if I give you this piece of coin, this Lydian coins, I know how much it's worth every single time. Eventually, too, the Chinese will invent paper money. Paper money will come around, and people will be very, paper money is not worth anything. It's garbage. Once people have started accepting it, it is worth something, right? Backed by gold and so forth. But as long as there's an idea that it is worth something, as long as everyone in all parties agree that paper has value, then it's currency. Anything can be currency, right? There were times where people didn't want the paper money. They didn't want the credit cards. They didn't want the checks. They didn't believe that it was a real form of currency because it wasn't gold. Gold's probably the most common one throughout anywhere in the world because it's one of the most precious metals, right? But we're moving into an age now where it's going to be all digital. It's going to be digital currency. Coin money and paper money are going to be a thing of the past. In our lifetime, it will be a thing. And this is somewhat of my opinion, but it's going to be a reality, right? It already is with the amount of things that are spent with credit cards or debit cards or now the cryptocurrencies that are out there. So just keep that in mind. Because Phoenicians, around 1000 BC. Now, I know we were in 600, now we're kind of going back 400 more years, but there's a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, groups of people doing a lot of different things in Mesopotamia. And one of them is hands down the most famous group of people when it comes to trading in any part of the world ever. The Phoenicians are well known. And if you look at the map, you can kind of see where I'm talking about. We talked about Egypt, and they are northeast of Egypt. They're on that edge, that eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, right? And the whole Mediterranean, where you see those arrows kind of flying out everywhere and all the green and so forth that are all around the edges, that is where they settle. They are going to be master shipbuilders and traders, and they're going to settle on port cities and create port cities. They're not concerned about fighting. They're not concerned about any of that. They want to trade and they want to make money, and they were awesome at it. And there's some things that they did that will highly advance the world quickly because of what they did. It wasn't their purpose to try to highly advance it. It's a product of what they did, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. So who were the Phoenicians, more specifically? Well, they're going to be sailing around on these boats. Again, they're great at building ships. They're great at getting wood from all over and metals from all over and trading that. So, and you want to write these down here. This describes the Phoenicians. Again, another group of people. They're the greatest traders in history. They were skilled with lumber and skilled metal workers. They could build a ship very quickly, and they're one of the fastest and most durable ships of their time. They can also sail those ships as well. This isn't like, okay, they're just building and that's it. No, they can actually sail it. That would be like Uber Eats driver is able to not only build the entire car, but he can also drive it like a NASCAR driver, right? So that would be incredibly impressive. They also invented glass blowing. And what glass blowing is, it's still used today. This art form, this skill form is shaping the glass, heating it up and so forth, and blowing into it. And it creates a unique style of glass based on blowing into it. We still do that today. Other thing you want to write down is the purple dye. The purple dye, and we talk about this in the podcast as well, how important purple dye was then and what it represented. Purple was a rare color. Most people were wearing brown, gray, earth tone colors. The more colorful things you wore, the more wealth that you had. That doesn't hold true today because we can easily make things. So don't think, well, that person always wears colorful stuff. He must be really rich. That's not what I'm saying. Back then, purple was an extremely rare color. If you had something in purple and in silk, you were super rich. But typically, purple was royalty. And it's made from snails. And, don't think that you're just kind of scribbling it in there with these unique snails. But they were able to kind of make this fabric. Well, they had the fabric, and they were able to dye the fabric with this purple leftovers of the snail, whatever you want to call it. And they were known for their purple dye because of that. The big one there is, this is huge. The Phoenician alphabet spread throughout the Mediterranean. It's the model for Western alphabets. So this is the first alphabet ever. It's different than cuneiform. It's different because cuneiform is pictographs. There are no letters. With an alphabet, I can make up new words as I go. I can hear somebody say something in a different language and use the letters that I have to make it in my language. If I hear a foreign word, I know what it sounds like and I can phonetically spell it out. If you've ever heard that, phonetically, the Phoenicians, it's where it comes from, right? If you were to phonetically sound out your name, how would you spell it without knowing? And that's what they were doing, and they're setting up this alphabet for the Greeks will adopt it eventually, then the Romans will adopt it, and it changes over time, as you'll see. But what you see is the Phoenician letters. Some look similar to what we have today, but some don't. So if I were to say like the bottom one there, the X, I wouldn't say X. We know, because we've been taught, that if you see that, you see that X, that means X, like I just said. But for them, they see that ta, right? Think about it like why Scrabble works so well, if the game Scrabble. I can toss out a bunch of words and toss a bunch of letters and make words out of them. You can't really do that with cuneiform, right? It doesn't really work that way. And the W, sin, I do whatever these are, the nun, mim, that's how we sound out. If we were in class, I would show you guys that we make our own words up. And what you can do is, for example, let's say that it's the end of school, all right? It's like a Friday, you're super excited to leave school or just be done with school, whether it's virtual or whether it's in the building, and you want to express the absolute joy that you have in a word, but you don't know what word to say. So you make up a word to express this feeling. And so you could say, Ra-go-doi-ba. Ra-go-doi-ba. I just made that word up, but I will phonetically spell it out for you, right? And that word means that. Now, okay? You'll see what I'm talking about. Another group of people around the Phoenicians keep surviving, and we'll talk about them and talk about Rome again, but they're pretty much minding their own business, being kind of trading and so forth, so they don't really get conquered to the level of what other people will. That's why there's so many different civilizations in Mesopotamia. The Assyrians are a group of people who are warlike with bows and chariots. So they're a group of people that are in Mesopotamia that believe the world will end if they lose a single battle, right? So that pretty much, or a war. But it's one way of remembering it is if you look at what I have there. I have the Assyrians, and I have in red there, I have Syria. Syria is a country today. It's where ISIS is located. And you think ISIS, you think warlike people. And that's maybe a way of helping you remember that. Okay, Syria. Oh, ISIS. Oh, they're warlike. Oh, the Assyrians. Okay. But what they're actually really known for, they're a warlike people that, some of the most barbaric things you can possibly do to human beings. It was like the movie, maybe like Texas Chainsaw Massacre type things, or the movie Saw type things that they would do to people that they captured. So you didn't want to be captured by the Assyrians, but they had a library of, this is where we found I believe the Epic of Gilgamesh as well. The Library of Ashurbanipal. The Library of Ashurbanipal. That is the guy who sets up this massive library, and it's not what you would think. It's more than likely mostly clay tablets. It's not like the library that we have here in the middle school or whatever high school you may be in at this point, right? So you need to write that down. Ashurbanipal sets up this library. It's kind of ironic. You have these, savage, warlike people, and then they're like, let's go read some books, all right? It's interesting. But this would be, Ashurbanipal holding that stone tablet. He's the Assyrian king who sets up the library. That's what you would need to know. Ashurbanipal. Again, I phonetically sounded that out. The next group of people, they're the Chaldeans, or the Chaldeans, right? This is in Iraq, modern-day Iraq. Their capital being there, Nineveh and Babylon are the two main cities, I should say. And you want to write that down, of course. Still Mesopotamia, still a huge group of people, but important. The time frame here, 634, 562 BC is roughly the time frame we're talking about now, more specifically in the area of Mesopotamia. Not like, Lydians were in Asia Minor, kind of up to the northwest, but there's a guy here called Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar II. You have already heard of him if you were listening to the previous episode, episode 3, on the Hebrews, because he will be the one that enslaves the Hebrews. So he's still considered, though, a great leader. We kind of tend to think, which rightfully so, that if you own slaves and you are okay with that you're a bad person. Well, looking in hindsight, absolutely, yeah. But then slavery was just based on if you were captured, if you lost a battle. All right, well, you lost. It's better to them. It was better than not dying, right? So he builds the Hanging Gardens of Babylon for his homesick wife. So his wife was from a lush vegetative area with lots of greenery all around her. But when they moved to Babylon, or Mr. Woods was telling me it could also be Nineveh. There's some debate whether the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were even in Babylon. But for this, let's just say they are 100% in Babylon. All right, so don't confuse it too much. She only really saw very little greenery and mostly desert. And if you're only looking at desert and no greenery, especially since having greenery the whole time, you're going to be a little bit upset. And think how you feel when you see greenery outside. It's like summertime. Like you feel better. Like when you have plants around you, you have like a little more life to you. And so what he did, what any good husband would do, he tried to make his wife happy. And so he builds the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now, I'm not saying when your wife needs a plant in her life that you build the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, but he did. And this thing would have been, we only have accounts, I believe, from Herodotus. I'll talk about Herodotus, of what he saw when he went there. So we don't have pictures, we don't have images. So you will see different variations, but they're all trying to describe the same thing through an artist's rendition of what it would have looked like. Maybe something like this, or maybe like this, or something like this. But regardless, you have a very dry area that needs lots of water for this, okay? And in order to keep all of this alive, you'd have to have massive irrigation systems set up, right? And so it was a marvel, right? Persians, one of the probably the most important groups of people that we talk about here, from 539 to 331 BC, so roughly a 200-year period. Again, right now, the ones that we've learned have 200, 300 years. Some have lasted, but we're at 244 here in America, so we'll see how much longer we can keep at it. So again, you're only writing the dates down to get the time frame. You're not writing the dates down to necessarily know them exactly. You just need to know the time frame. So it's about 500 years before Christ is born. Okay. This is the Persian Empire at its height, right? So you have for working from the left of your screen to the right of your screen, Thrace, they'll have Egypt, all of Asia Minor, through what we know as Mesopotamia, right? And then continuing on eastward all the way into India, which is the next episode. They had this massive empire. Most of the empires you talked about were just around Mesopotamia itself, nowhere near what the Persians got. The first Persian king, soon to be king of kings, you need to know is Cyrus the Great. Cyrus, I talked about him earlier briefly with the Hebrews. We talked about the Persians briefly with the Hebrews. Cyrus is known as like the savior for the Hebrews, because what he does is he frees the Hebrews. Once he conquers the Chaldeans, he's like, yeah, hey guys, you're free to move wherever you want in my empire. I don't care. You don't have to be a slave in Babylon anymore. Because remember, the Hebrews were enslaved in Babylon. And he's like, go back. So if you remember, the Hebrews, some of them went back to the promised land, which is Canaan, and some just stayed in Babylon. But the freedom of religion is there. Cyrus went from nothing into this emperor, again, king of kings, emperor, and created that massive empire you saw in the previous slide. All right, huge. Multiple cultures under one rule, under one guy, right? So he creates the Persian Empire. That's what he's known for. That's a pretty big deal. The religious tolerance, it always really is inspiring to me, because you're in a time frame where this is not only is it not normal, it's not even in the realm of normality. No one is giving religious tolerance to anyone. If you have a different religion than what the standard is, more than likely you're going to be killed or tortured to death, whatever it may be. But he's like, hey, I don't care what religion you are, just pay your taxes. And that's what we have here in America. That's one of the reasons we came here. The Pilgrims came here is for religious freedom. And that was only 400 years ago. So there's a huge, whatever happened, whenever the Persians no longer existed, that kind of idea of, hey, you can believe in whatever you want, because there are lots of religions out there, and who knows which one is correct. We all have our own personal beliefs, but the Persians believe that you are free to choose that. I'm not going to force you to believe in what I believe just because it's convenient and nice for me. Hey man, believe what you want. Doesn't matter how ridiculous it may seem. That, to me, was incredible. So they're known for that. They're Persians. They conquered the Lydians. The Lydians, remember, they adopted the coin money. That was huge, because you have this massive empire, you want the same currency. Imagine if America still went on different currencies per state. We used to have Pennsylvania dollars and Virginia coins and New Jersey bucks. Now we all have a uniform system. Well, Cyrus decides, if I'm going to have this massive, awesome empire and this religious tolerance, I'm going to need a coin system set up. So he sets a uniform coin system. Great idea. Cyrus also captured the city of Jerusalem, allowing the return to the promised land. Like I said, because he captured Jerusalem, because he freed the Jews from Babylon, they're able to, not only are they free from Babylon, but they're able to return to Jerusalem. So Cyrus is like the savior. He is thought very highly of in the Hebrew text. But somebody's savior might be somebody else's, terror, all right? Because he has to conquer people in order to do this. So it means he's going to have to do a lot of killing. So it's always interesting. We'll talk about Alexander. Was Alexander the Great actually great? Or was he more of a terror? For some, he was great. Others, all the people he conquered, he was a nightmare, right? They didn't want to be conquered. Although the Persians set a precedent that people actually did want to be conquered by the Persians, because, again, hey, religious tolerance? I pay some coin money, I get protection from this massive Persian army. There's uniform currency, there's trade. I can move about freely. It's pretty nice in the Persian Empire. Later on, after Cyrus dies, there is his half-son, maybe like a higher official. We're not entirely sure if there is a relation to Cyrus, but regardless, Darius the Great takes over. Darius, however you want to say it, doesn't really matter, because he's still great, depending on your perspective. He sets up what's known as imperial bureaucracy. And not only have you should have written down Darius the Great, but you also need to write down imperial bureaucracy. These are two words that elude 8th graders. I don't know why. We've tried, but the sooner you can get this, the sooner things will make sense throughout the entire year. Anytime you hear the word imperial, it is of or relating to an empire. So if I think of Star Wars. Oh, that's an Imperial Walker. Oh, that's an Imperial Stormtrooper. Oh, that's an Imperial Starship. That's the Empire's, right? It's the Empire ship. It's the Empire Stormtrooper. It's, all theirs, right? Of or relating to an empire. The bureaucracy is basically the government that's set up in order to help it run, like governors and other smaller government workers in order to make the government run. So you have at the top of it, who's at the top of an empire? Who would be at the top of an empire? An emperor. So the emperor is in control of the bureaucracy. He can't run that massive empire by himself. You saw how big it was. He can't do it. He has to break it up into smaller provinces, also called, the Persians called them satrapies, okay, or satraps. Satraps will actually be the governors, essentially. But so that he can manage it, he can report back, because you're not going to be able to communicate them quickly, right? If the empire will stretch over 2,500 miles, you're not going to be able to. That's like pretty much the length of the U.S. You're not going to be able to easily communicate that. Like, you can't text, you can't call, you can jump on a horse, right? It's still going to take you a long time to communicate one message. So, in imperial bureaucracy is where officials, the G-O-V'-T just means government. It's a shortened, abbreviated version. The sooner you learn it, the better, because you're going to be writing government a lot in this class and probably any other history class that you have. So that's how I abbreviate it, and you're welcome to abbreviate your notes as well. Government where officials rule territories on the leader's behalf, right? So in a way, it's similar to what we have here in America. We have a democratic bureaucracy, right, where we vote people in. If you're an imperial bureaucracy, you don't vote the emperor in. He takes power by force. But we are a democratic bureaucracy because we have governors for each individual state. We definitely are realizing that now. And whenever they need help with or assistance with something, the federal government will step in. All something that you should have learned last year. Darius was an excellent ruler. And you're not called great unless you're excellent at what you're doing. Very efficient at his ruling. Organizing the empire into different provinces. These are the satrapies, which you should write down. Each satrap was led by a royal governor, also known as a satrap. So these satrapies were known as basically, think of them like counties, or if you want to think of them like states, you can. But the satraps are the ones that ruled over them. Satrap is a governor, right? And the governor would report hey, I need help here at the far ends of your empire, Darius. How do you send that message out quickly? And you need to write this down as well. And maybe you want to draw a little road, because it may sound bizarre, but because we're writing about roads, but it was the royal road from Sardis to Susa, from, as you see there, from Asia Minor, the very edge of Asia, to almost the very bottom of the Tigris River, where that flows into the Persian Gulf there, okay, as we know it today. It's about, I think it was about 1,600 miles, okay, almost the length of the U.S., a couple hundred miles short, this road. Now, you think, well, Mr. Shank, why do we care about roads? Well, you're going to be, any type of imperial bureaucracy, any type of bureaucracy in general, communication is key. They can't text, they can't call. So the best way to do it is jump on a horse and get that message to Darius as quickly as you possibly can. So if Darius is all the way down in Susa and you need help, maybe assistance, maybe there's an invading force in Sardis all the way up to the west there in Asia Minor, you need to send somebody to Susa. Send them by horse. So you send them by horse. They're traveling along the royal road, and every 15 miles they have a horse, a fresh horse, watered and fed, rested, ready to go, and they can jump on that, and every 15 miles they can do that. So you have a new fresh horse every 15 miles. So you run that horse as fast as you possibly can, right? And if the carrier, the one that's carrying the message, gets tired or injured or hurt or can't go on, they just take that message and they go. So what might take 2 months to get across the empire now takes 2 weeks. Communication is key. But not only that, you can move all of your troops efficiently, right? So once you get that message, you can send all those troops there. You can send that information back and help back to where you need. You can also use it as a trade route, which they did. It was extremely safe on the royal road, right? You have to have a vast road system set up. They had more than just this, but this is the main one. This would be like the I-95 of the day, right? This is in Mesopotamia, because there you see Babylon, there you see the Tigris and Euphrates, but it's just a lot bigger because it's during this time period during the Persians. Darius will have a son, aka Darius, whatever you want to call him. His name is Xerxes. I know it's an X and you want to say exercise. It's not. It's Xerxes. Xerxes, if you've ever seen the movie 300, that's the depiction of Xerxes. Xerxes right there, from 518 to 465 BC. Again, you're writing his name down and the time frame as well. What he is known for, if I backtrack a little bit, if you look at the map here, you can see that they are starting to get into Greece. And this is the time when we have Athens and Sparta that are located here in this area. All the way on the western side, to be the left of your screen, you have Greece. Darius gets into this area. Darius wants Greece. He offers them peace. He says, hey, listen, I have this awesome, massive empire. Just surrender, basically, and you'll be let go. You'll just be a part of my empire. Pay tax, no problem. Well, the Athenians and the Spartans weren't going to take that deal, and they're kind of the ones that got involved in this anyways, and they saw Persia as a threat that was going to eventually come anyways. So the Athenians, way less soldiers, way less resources, okay, than the Persians do. But as we'll talk about, they will, when we talk about Greece, they're going to fight off Darius and the Persians, and Darius is going to have to retreat, and it won't, he'll have to basically put a tail between his legs, and he will vow to come back and defeat the Greeks once and for all. Fortunately for him, he does not make it back. He dies before that, and his son Xerxes takes over. Xerxes is trying to defend his father's name and trying to make the Athenians and the Spartans suffer for rebellion, not even rebellion, just basically going against this massive Persian army. Herodotus said that they had over 1 million soldiers. All right, to put that in perspective, I think we have like 1.5 million here in the U.S. They had 1.5 million then. It's just insane, And the Spartans and the Athenians, a couple thousand, a couple tens of thousands they had, maybe not much, maybe 40,000 against 1 million. Yeah. Eventually, as the story goes, and I'll touch more upon this as we talk about Greece, Xerxes will burn Athens to the ground, but they'll lose the Persian War. All right, and that's kind of the downfall, the eventual start of the downfall of the Persians. They didn't see that maybe then, but they lost to this. Persia's the Goliath, right? And Athens and Sparta, these Greek city-states, are the David, and David came out on top. What Persia also had is not only did they have religious tolerance, but one of the religions that they had, their main religion, which is what you want to write down, is Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism, right? One of the religions that you have to know. I would also maybe even draw that symbol if you can, if you're a good artist. And again, any type of drawing you can do, anything to help you remember, creating acronyms or drawing, or even just drawing a line for the roads and just putting in Royal Road, that would be good enough to help you remember it. Remember, you're trying to get it to save, right? Like think of like your mind like buffering, and by you writing it down is you being able to save it and getting that buffer to stop and to get stuck in your mind. That's essentially what's going on when you're writing stuff down. So even if you are, Mr. Shank, I'm super smart, I don't need to write stuff down, you still need to be able to save it. So make sure you write this down. So the main Persian religion was founded by a prophet named, this is really, really difficult here, Zoroaster. So he is the founder of Zoroastrianism. It's not difficult here, ladies and gentlemen. He was seeking the answer, why should so much suffering and chaos exist in the world? Which is a legitimate question. I mean, we ask that today. And he's asking this 2,500 years ago. And he wants to find the answer. Right, and he kind of comes up. There are two spiritual armies that are constantly at battle with one another. The first was led by a god of good, Ahura Mazda is the name, and the second was led by a god of evil, okay, Ahriman. So these two armies are constantly at war with one another, and when bad things are happening, that means the bad armies are winning. And when the bad god is winning. And when good things are happening, Ahura Mazda and the good army is winning, right? So he believed that people could control who they would follow. In other words, they had free will, which is a huge thing. There are some religions out there that, hey, listen, I'm not doing any of this. I don't have any free will. This is just God, or the gods taking over. I have no control over this whatsoever. It's in his or her or their hands. Zoroastrianism preaches you have free will. You can do whatever you want. No one's controlling you like a puppet. Geppetto's not controlling Pinocchio here. All right? It's your responsibility. Don't blame it on anyone else. Don't blame it on a higher power. Don't blame it on anyone else around you. Free will. Do what you want. You have the freedom to do it. Okay? But it's your choice. Good or bad, what you do, right? Holy writings of Zoroastrianism were contained in the books called the Avestas. But the main thing from Zoroastrianism, you would need to know that the founder is Zoroaster, what question he's trying to answer, that there are two competing armies. This is kind of where many believe the ideas come from, God and the devil. God being the good army and the devil being the bad army. So the free will thing comes up there as well. And this is, again, I'm not preaching this. I'm not saying I'm a Zoroastrianism. All I'm doing is giving you what they believe in, and you can take it from there. All right. Well, this has been Shankism, Mesopotamia. Hopefully you enjoyed everything you heard, and I'll see you next time.